8, 9, and by 2050 we're looking at 10 billion people. But our land mass is not expanding, and our resources are not expanding. So we're looking at trends that cannot continue. So above the micro-environmental issues, the one I'd like to just spend a little time on with you is that of population. Population and demographics in terms of three things: land use, water use, and non-reusable resources. Now consider land uses. We first identified a few years ago that China was getting very worried about illegal urbanization and the relentless building of golf courses, and was beginning to lay down the law as it wanted to reserve enough land to be able to grow crops to feed its people. And China has also been involved in buying land internationally. Just a couple of weeks ago, the New Zealand government intervened and stopped it buying 20 large dairy farms in New Zealand. But many countries have seen long-term rental or sale of land to countries like South Korea, India, Saudi Arabia, and some European countries, intended to cultivate crops and create food security for their own populations. And all of this is taking grazing land out of commission. And then we saw a number of reports that the Amazon was becoming closely linked to the destruction of the forests in the Amazon were being closely linked to the rapidly growing Brazilian cattle herds. And Greenpeace produced a fairly major report entitled The Slaughter of the Amazon, talking just about this. Now the facts in this report, I think, do need proper scientific challenge, and the industry does need to stand up and institute some research to get at actual facts. But it was clear that at some stage going forward, we will have to adjust to the fact that we are in a small planet with a lot of people on it. Cattle, in terms of protein, are inefficient users of land. And if the cattle are grain-fed, they're inefficient in terms of the use of oil and of energy. And I don't think you can just say this is a PR problem. This is a scientific problem which our industry and anyone using leather will have to consider. The Amazon biome itself supplies the world with 8 million hides. Now another big land-related issue is landfill. In large parts of the world, we just don't have enough holes in the ground to throw our waste materials in. And we also have big problems of seepage into groundwater and of methane production from the waste that we throw away into landfill at the moment. And if you start thinking of Europe with 300 million people consuming more than 4 pairs of shoes per capita per annum, the United States, similar population, consuming 8 pairs per capita per annum, that's a lot of holes in the ground when you start thinking of the number of shoes that are being disposed of on an annual basis. And that means we'll have to start thinking in the manufacture of our product right from the design stage, not just of a shoe, but of the leather and of the other components. How long should that product last, and how should it be disposed of at its proper end of life? And also environmentally, in the 20th century, we saw a term coming up which we call catnap, currently available technology narrowly avoiding prosecution. And in large parts of the world, particularly the tanning industry, was keen only to avoid prosecution rather than to really improve things. And as you go around the world, you do see some curious things, some beautiful effluent plants that are not run because companies don't like to spend or can't find the money to actually keep them running. And we've also seen quite a number of new plants built in the last 20 years, to my surprise, that have been built with limited primary treatment or no secondary treatment. And we've begun to see in unexpected places like China, like Pakistan, even Ethiopia, the ordinary population, ordinary citizens, starting to say they've had enough of this. They need clean drinking water, they're entitled to it, and they object to tanneries making the difference and polluting the water that they need to drink. And we're beginning to see that legislation, because generally speaking, environmental legislation regarding water consumption is very good around the world. It's the enforcement that is very erratic. And now we're beginning to see governments actually saying, no, we have to listen to our people. We are going to enforce our environmental legislation. And this extends far beyond just toxins and chrome-6. It goes into things like soluble salts. And there's quite a few people now believe that the leather industry's biggest problem is actually common salt, getting into the water table and making aquifers and regular water unsuitable for drinking. Common salt used in preservation and in pickling has become one of the leather industry's very biggest problems. The last demographic point we need to consider is non-renewable resources. Mostly we tend to be thinking in that about peak oil and things of that sort. But if you use up chromium at its current level, it has a lifespan of only a few decades. And while we choose vegetable tannins today mostly from renewable resources, if we return to the way we did our veg tanning in the 19th century, tanners did massive damage to forests, to mangrove swamps around the world, not least here in Middle America and Central America. And if you take what Dr. German from Reutlinger said earlier this year, if we move very large quantities of chrome tanning back to vegetable tanning, there just are not enough trees in the world to be able to produce these higher volumes sustainably. So when you look at these issues and you wonder at all the timing of all these things are going on and how soon they'll need to be addressed, the quote that you have to think about is one from Toffler. The future arrives faster than you expect and in the wrong order. Because our customers and many consumers are aware of all these matters. They're well educated. Our international trade organizations, especially in the leather industry, the tanning aspect, are not structured to meet the demands and the requests that are coming from a modern global industry. Certainly not to meet them with good science, which is what is required. The continued defense of making leather because we are a byproduct industry and only soaking up somebody else's waste material is not an effective way to communicate to modern consumers, particularly with NGOs that are so well funded and so effective at PR. Taking hides and filling them with chrome to be left in landfill in the form of chrome shavings and chrome trimmings, along with putting large quantities of salty waters into our aquifers, doesn't constitute good citizenship. And of course there are solutions to all these problems. And many of them we see in use here in Mexico. But the leather industry around the world will have to re-examine its technology, properly commercialize all these cleaning up activities, and